pass between the pages of my mind.
Today's your 100th birthday.
It is.
And I would like to ask, what was your very first memory?
I really don't have to think about it hard. It was a period when my sister dragged me into the kitchen. And I was busy doing something. I was really not very happy about that. I was 2 years old, and in the middle of the kitchen was this dish. And beside the dish was this little thing that wiggled. And it was a puppy. My birthday present. And I called it Spot, because it had black and white spots, big ones.
What kind of dog was it? Do you remember?
It was a fox terrier.
And I imagine that you had that dog for a while.
And Mother was worn out because I guess I was kind of like Oliver. I had too much energy compared to my sister, and I wore her out. So that dog and I were companions, and we ran. We had a wide house with a double living room, and we ran back and forth, and he would hold on to my rompers.
Tell us a little about grammar school in those years.
Well, in grammar school, for the words we learned in first grade, we had a train, and I had managed to get up in front of the train. And then there was a word that came along, and our teacher was old, and she had white hair, and she was kind of heavy, and she was asking who knew a word. And she'd gone all over the kids, and nobody knew the answer, so she called on me, and I didn't know it either, and she threw a piece of chalk at me.
Oh.
And the word was yet. And since my last name began with Y, she thought I would know the word, which I didn't.
Okay, let's go into high school. I'm fascinated. You were in high school in the mid 20s, late 20s, late 20s,
30s.
Early 30s. Okay.
30s.
How was high school in the 30s?
Well, it was wonderful. As a freshman, you just had to learn how to go from class to class, which was our first experience at that. And there were clubs to join, and we learned about new kids that came from other schools, junior high schools. And my teachers were all great. I was not an aggressive person. I was very, very shy. And but I joined clubs, and I was the person that got the subscriptions one year because I tried to be right, and I didn't succeed at that at all. So I got more subscriptions than anybody had before, so that was my forte.
Now, did you play sports in high school, or was that off into
I
college?
played softball on the softball team.
Yep. How'd your team do that year? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, then they probably weren't state champions or anything.
Oh, no,
you
no.
would remember
It was
that.
just fun.
Uh-huh.
What position did you play when you were playing softball?
I played shortstop, and I pitched.
Mm-hmm.
That was underhand.
Yeah.
Well, in those days, then there were women's teams. You had.
No, I played on a men's team.
Oh, you played on the boys' team.
Yeah, I don't think women's team had started then. They started around the World War.
Did you have to audition to get on the team, or did you just?
No.
They just let you on?
Yeah, they needed me. They were short people. And everybody loved football, and I did not, and they just had to drag me sometimes to football. But I loved the basketball because my sister had taken me with her when she was in high school, and I played myself, so I really loved the basketball team.
How much older was your sister than you?
She was 3.5 years.
3.5 years, okay. So she might have been a senior when you were a freshman in high school, unless you went through junior high school.
She was in her last half semester.
Okay.
We had half semesters.
Okay. And then I'm going to open it up to them, but I'd like to hear just a little bit about maybe the 40s, because that goes into the war years and what that was like here in the United States and for you.
Well, we were married in 1940, and we got nervous as it came to 42, and then the war broke out, and I don't know, that was the beginning of my husband's engineering career, and from then on we just moved around the country.
Yeah. What are some of the houses you lived in? I know you guys had some great homes.
Well, when we left Fort Wayne, left home, we didn't have a house for a long time until we ended back in Gary, Indiana. And he knew he was going to be there a while, and eventually we were there for a long time. But that was the very first house we had, and Kenton was in, Becky was born there, and Kenton was in first and second grade, and because we moved him even there to another school, they held him back for half a semester. They had half the semesters. Well, he was in 3 different schools between first and second grade, so that's why they held him back a while till he caught up.
Okay. And then you went through Big Sky and some other places then, but that's carrying years on. Did anyone here want to ask any questions about any parts of that era or any other? You have something in mind?
So, could I ask a question?
Sure.
During that time period when, right after you married, and then you had children, did you ever have a career of your own, or were you raising your family?
No, when I got married, I was let out at the Lincoln National Life Insurance Company, because back then a lot of the corporations wouldn't hire married women. They just didn't.
They felt that you would probably...
And I got fired.
Because
I went back to, your grandpa's asked me back to help him when his secretary was gone. I worked on the board, U.S. when they were calling the soldiers. I worked on that for a while, and then that was the end of that. We started moving around. Yeah. So I never did work again.
Well, you worked raising kids is a lot of work.
Well, yeah. That was during the war. Kenton was born during the war.
Yeah.
That's a good story.
Yeah. Should we go then? I'm fascinated by your Big Sky life there and some of that, because it was such a great ranch and all the things that
Or
went
how
on
about Aspen too?
in Aspen.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about those places.
Well, when we moved to Florida, I thought we had this beautiful new house. It was a limestone house, and it had a basement. It had a window, 16-foot window, which carried down to the basement where we had the game room, and there was a full kitchen and everything else. All right, catch me up. Where am I going?
Well, we were talking about houses. You're now in Florida with the big window.
Okay. And then we met, Hal, my husband, met the vice president of Coca-Cola, and he was president of the USLTA, and this is a long story, and he went to Pompano to the Silver Thatch Tennis Club for his vacations, and he told my husband about it, and so we came down and did that the first year, and then after a couple of years, Kenton said, Hal said, I'm going to sell the business and go move to Florida, so I got dragged to Florida. I thought I was going to have my grandchildren in this beautiful house, but it didn't happen that way. I got dragged to Florida, and that's how I got to Florida and went back into tennis along with him, because I never saw him. He was always on the tennis court or working.
Okay. I know Becky asked me to ask you about one of your favorite horses, if you remember some good horses that you had.
We only had two, and we didn't have a ranch. We had a ranchette.
What do you remember about those horses?
Well, mine was a quarter horse, and our friend, he was a three-star general, said, he was a Montanian, and he said he thought it had some Indian cayuse in it because it had an inch-long hair. And it wasn't a big horse. And then we bought a horse from a student at Montana State whose grandfather gave him a horse to train and sell to pay for his schooling. So he was a big gelding, and he was a dumb horse. My horse was real mountain smart. He didn't know mountains, and he shied at every rock he saw. But anyway, he knew how to circle and do all that fancy stuff for the rodeo. So that's my horse story.
Oh, okay. I'd be fascinated. You've owned a lot of cars over a lifetime. What was your first car? Do you remember the first car you rode in?
It was a British Triumph.
Oh, that's right, the TR3 they
Yes.
talked about. And it was white, I guess.
Yes, it was. I had that for a while. And then Kenton, when Kenton got his license, he and a friend went to a party, and coming back, there was over a little hill, a car was backing out, and he hit the brakes and skidded and rolled over.
Ooh.
So we had to get a new Triumph, and I got a red one this time.
Do you kind of remember that was a convertible, I assume?
Yes.
Do you remember kind
Took
of
off the windows, took off the top.
do you remember kind of the thrill of driving it that way?
Oh, I loved it. Of course, we were raised with that. They didn't have automatic cars back when I was little.
Right. Sure.
What do you recall as being the first car that your daddy bought?
My father,
Yes.
he always drove Buicks, but I don't remember the first one
Okay.
because the first trip we took was when I was 2.
Uh-huh.
You know, in that picture that you saw very first, that was my first camping trip.
Yes.
Where was that?
It went up to where, it's outside of Traverse City where the music festival is.
Uh-huh.
And there was a lake there, which was a state park. And I can remember the tall trees, you know, that I saw. But well, that probably was later than 2 years old, because we went up every summer, someplace in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you have a close relationship with your grandparents?
Yes, I dearly loved my grandfather Alan, and Kenton is just like him. And my grandma Ellen, I didn't know very well because at that time she would. Do you remember that square marble table? Yeah. Do you have that? Well, she sat at that table in their family room. They had a big house which had a double living room and a parlor and a dining room and so forth. And she sat there and she never talked much. So she didn't live very long.
Oh.
And anyway, my grandfather had a second wife, and as a teenager I used to go up on spring break and stay with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How far away were they?
They were in Coldwater, Michigan, where both my grandparents' sets were raised.
Wow, it's beautiful around there.
Your father was very adventurous. Have you already talked to him about the lot he bought and the things that you would do there? You were telling us some of that yesterday. When he would come home from work and Grammy would cook
we had
dinner.
an acre.
Acre.
Yeah, it was out. It wasn't out in the boonies. There was a country club down the road, Fort Wayne Country Club, but he landscaped it, and he had a boundary of honeysuckle bushes, which were about 10 feet high. So it enclosed it, and it was very private, and it was a hill, and it went down. And he built a barbecue pit out of brick, and he built a pergola, which had grapevines on it with a table. And in the heat of the summer, Mother would bake a dinner, and when Daddy came home, we'd go out and we'd have a picnic out there, or hamburgers or whatever you want. So we had a lot of fun, and there he taught us things. You want to hear that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, he taught us archery, and he taught us stars, all about the stars, and we mowed the lawn with him. And we had the pear tree, and we picked pears, and he always did something, to keep us occupied, and we just really grew up well.
Oh, what a blessing.
And we'd always go for rides after dinner, and he was really good about going to other towns and state parks and all that kind of stuff. And they taught us all the trees. We hunted for hickory and walnut trees, and some bittersweet in the fall, and all the wildflowers. We learned all the wildflowers, and it was just he just kept going on that.
Did your mother have an interest in bird watching?
Yes, she was the birder, so that was part of the training, that we knew all the birds. Sure.
Wow.
And we were good later we would go on the bird hikes with her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both Nancy and I. But Nancy didn't take the birds like I did.
Oh.
And I passed it on to my daughter, or my grandmother did, my mother did. So she's an avid birder now. I think she's added more than 100 birds to her list since she's been here.
So would you say that you took after your father more or your mother more?
Well, I think both of them. I've absorbed a lot from both of them. I learned to knit and how to sew from my mother. She never taught me to cook, though. She taught Nancy to cook, but I was the one that mowed the lawn and scrubbed the porches and stuff. So I really was my dad's son. That's what it amounted to.
You were a tomboy?
Yeah, he'd take me down in his workshop and he'd show me all this stuff, even the chemistry. He had a box of mercury, which rolls, you know. It's like melted silver. And that's what I remember most all of it. But he taught me about motors, and he gave me a box of nails and hammers and stuff like that when I was 5 years old for my birthday. And I went down in the basement and I'd build these wood pieces. So anyway.
That's good. I would like to get into some of your fabulous trips too. We talked about that a little bit at breakfast, but let's. Anybody else have something else earlier? Or?
You want to pick one?
Well, I don't know. I was fascinated by your Egypt trip, and that you and let's hear that story again.
Well, we had done Israel, and then we got on the train and went down to the Valley of the Kings. And a funny story is, Hal and I drank martinis. And so, and I was by myself, so I went to the bar. Nobody was at the bar but the Brits. It was a British hotel. And I asked for a martini, and they didn't know how to make it. They didn't know how to make it martini. But the next day, we got, some of us got on a boat and went across the river to the tombs of all the men, and King Tut's tomb was open. It seldom was ever opened. It was that day. They only opened 2 tombs a day for visitors. So we went into the tomb and we went down, 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 and all the walls were filled with paintings. You know, the Egyptian paintings, it's always the same stuff. And we ran right into his tomb, which was gold. And then there was a room lower down where all his belongings were. And the one I remember most was the little red chair, which he sat in as a child, as a little boy. So that was a wonderful, wonderful treat. And then when the tomb stuff came over here, I never went to see it because they wouldn't be as good.
Is that where you rode the camel for the first time, you think?
I'm really confused on the times of the camel.
Sure. Well, tell us what it's like to ride a camel. None of us have ridden a
I
camel.
don't think that was the first time.
Okay. Tell us what it's like to ride a camel, because we've never ridden one. Do they kneel down for you? What's the deal with the
Yeah,
camels?
they do. They kneel down. I know Marrakesh was one of them, and Dubai was one of them. And I have to tell you about the camel industry in Dubai and in the Emirates, really. They race them like we race our horses, and they run about $1 million. And what they do is they go along the racetrack in cars with their computers and control the camels. I don't know how they do it, but we were told that that's what they did. And there's there are lots of camel farms, you know, in that area. So
they breed racing camels, or?
yeah,
Wow.
and we did go to a camel farm. You know, not all the camels, because in the desert they use them for, you know.
And Dubai is a fairly new, I guess, city, or at least built up as a big, expensive city.
It's only 40 years old.
Yeah. So were you there when it was early, or in mid, or?
Well, they were beginning to when we approached Dubai, we came in the evening, and we looked down, and there was map of the world made out of islands. It was fabulous, really fabulous as we came in. And there were 3 palm trees that were all lit up, islands, as we approached. And not the world islands. And that was so spectacular. And I thought, oh, and then we were on the river, our hotel was, and we did a hiking of the town, but the cranes, see, coming from engineering background, that I saw all these cranes, and the high rises were absolutely fabulous, and more of them going up. But the architecture in them was so modern and so different, you know. And I found the same thing in Abu Dhabi, which was the head of the government of the 5 Emirates. No, it was Oman broke off and Bahrain broke off, so there were just the 3 of them, you know. But Abu Dhabi was the money center, and they had their own bank and for the sheiks, and it was a big high-rise. So, and then the same thing was happening there with the cranes. So they were going, and they started Disneyland, and they expected it to be the largest in the world. Everything they expected to be the largest in the world, the best university in the world, and they were bringing all the brains, the universe in, you know, to be. But they were really affected by the crash, you know, and they really had a hard time. But the family ran it. I mean, this was done by the top 3 guys. And everything was owned by them, and they got their workers from abroad. They had no people that lived in the natives that worked, you know. And there they had 3 wives in Dubai. The others.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And they had the biggest mall in the world. I mean, they had a mall that had a ski run in it. And they had a fountain where they had divers going down, and a marina, and all sorts of things in this. You just can't imagine it unless you've been there. And you can go. Ken Kaufman does his own trips to Dubai and the Emirates. You get on a ship and then you go to all the rest of the Emirates.
Good to know.
So, but we stayed in Dubai longer. But Oman was a beautiful, beautiful city. Yeah.
Let's go back and talk a little bit about Kenton and Becky.
Okay.
Let's get a little bit of background since they're not in here. Let's hear what it was like raising them and what they were like as kids.
Well, Kenton, I never had a problem with Kenton. He was so laid back. And I didn't know anything about raising boys, and so I didn't know whether I was raising them right or not. But he was everybody's friend. You know, he loved people, and I wanted to name him Jonathan, you know, after David's friend in the Bible. But Hal didn't want him to be named Johnny, you know, for some reason. But that's what he is. He's a Jonathan. Anyway, he grew up, and he started out being on the freshman football team, and we got a call from the coach, and he said, I don't think he should play football. He's got asthma. From the grass. He was allergic to grass. So he turned to wrestling, and he was pretty successful at wrestling, And at that point, Hal could get away from work, you know. He was that far along in building the business, and he went to every single time he wrestled. So that's Kenton, and then he went on to Illinois in the engineering field. And I said, what in the world did you pick Illinois for? Why didn't you pick Purdue or MIT? He said, Mother, Illinois is number 2 in the country. So anyway,
Okay.
that was Kenton's story.
Well, let's hear about,
And Becky.
yeah, Becky.
Oh, yeah. Becky was, she had nightmares in 2nd grade. She was in a class, it was 3/4 boys, and she had a manly woman teacher, big and gruff voice, and looking back, I know that's why she had these nightmares. But we sent her with her grandpa and grandma to New Mexico, you know, to be with our family there for the summer, and she never had another one. And Roxy had taken her to the Girl Scout camp to be, and she had a nightmare then because they had seen a cat. Yeah. Or they talked about a cat, the girls had talked about a cat or seen one. So, anyway, she never had one after that.
That's good. And so she was a student, she was a good student, she went on to going through high school. Tell us a little bit more, transition. I'm just thinking that her kids are going to be fascinated by hearing these stories,
Yeah.
and the grandkids will be fascinated by hearing these stories too.
Yeah.
So what was her childhood like after that? Did she?
Well, we moved from Gary, Indiana to Illinois, Western Springs, Illinois during that time. So that's the time she had the nightmares. But after that, she became a brownie, and there were two girls next door that she played with, and she was in a musical in 8th grade of Tom
Sawyer, maybe?
Tom Sawyer. They did Tom Sawyer. And she got the leading part of Becky. She was a perfect Becky. And the neighborhood, one of the neighborhood girls gave her a pink umbrella, and somebody else gave her a pink dress, and that's what she wore. But there was a girl that had a good voice that they thought they ought to use, and so they divided the nights between the two of them. And the other girl's name was Beverly Shea. And her father happened to be George Beverly Shea.
Mm.
Oh,
What else did Becky do in
She
high
was very
school?
musical too, right?
Oh, she
Piano.
learned to play the organ, and I sat in that church every afternoon after school. You know, it would get dark in the winter, and she'd be in this church practicing. And she played for Student Sunday. And we looked all over at schools that had organs. And we finally found that some of them had one, some of them had 2 practice organs. But we finally went to Illinois, and they had 8. So she decided to go there. And then when she got there, they wouldn't let her go use the organ because she was on the tennis team or not. So she went on the tennis team.
Wow.
Anyway, they wouldn't let her because she was in elementary, you know.
Oh,
That's why she couldn't do that. So that was a blow, and
Yeah.
she's never played it since.
But she was on a tennis team in college?
Well, the USLTA gathered young girls and boys, that had potential. And she worked under Gus Palafox, who was a pro from South America. So retired, and she learned tennis under him when the indoor courts were built around. So she had a real good background in tennis.
And she came by that though because you play tennis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we belonged to the tennis club, and Kenton was gone by that time in college.
And she still plays tennis. Yeah, Becky does.
Okay?
Yeah, good. Anybody else have things? This is coming up on about a half an hour. That's a pretty long time to go. Yeah, here we go.
Could I just ask about your sister relationship with Nancy after you both married and had your families? How did that friendship come closer? I just remember it being very close.
Then y'all travel
You
together.
and Nancy.
Oh, yes. Well, neither one, getting to traveling, neither one of us had husbands who wanted to travel. So we traveled together, and we just had a marvelous time. We went to London and stayed with Bobby and Bea Davis, and they were expecting their first child, and Davy did join us there, but Nancy's husband. But then we went up to the Townsend home, and he was an earl, and just had a wonderful time there. And I gave Robin a graduation present to go there, and they got a woman at the stables, their big stables where the very first house was built by John Townsend, and it was, kind of fallen apart, but at least the ruins were there. And she learned more about it than we did when we went together. But the Earl and the Queen were friends, and when the Queen came home from her weekends at Balmoral, she stayed with him, and they had the Queen Mary's horses there with them. And they evidently had gained a lot of property, and it was between East and West Raynham. And the manor was called Raynham, and the son had to use the name Raynham. He lived in London, which Becky called. I didn't even know there was a son when I was with Nancy. But I was invited to, they made bells for the church, finished the bells, and the Americans made a bell. And so anyway, that was our connection. And I was invited to the opening of that service and everything, but I was on my way to Big Sky, and I didn't want to go alone, that way. And I'm sorry in retrospect that I didn't do that, but I have the movie.
The Townsends are what side of the family?
The Yap side. Yeah. So they're your side. And my middle name is Townsend. See, I'm Harriett Townsend.
What got you to Aspen?
Well, when I got hauled to Florida, I said, I'm not staying here in the summertime. And so he said, okay, you can go anywhere you want. And I picked Aspen because of the music and the backpacking and the hiking and all that stuff. So that's how we got to Aspen. And we had been to Aspen. A friend of ours had gone to Aspen to open a store, a leather store, and had asked Hal to help him. So Hal did, and it was the summer Becky graduated from college, and we were planning her wedding. And so he went on, and then after the wedding was planned, I went out for a couple of weeks. And from then on, I bought a season ticket to the orchestra, and we lived right across the river from it. And there was a walkway that went across, and I could walk to the tent, and they had concerts all the time, you know. And I played tennis next to Ishta Perlman's children. And a couple others, you know. So it was just a wonderful life. Yeah. And we just explored that area and climbed mountains and had a great time.
And did you sell Aspen and then buy Montana?
Well, the eastern people came up, and that village changed a lot, which is happening to Andreas, she said, now. And our friends started leaving, and Hal became itchy, you know. And our friends that we had brought to Aspen, that I heard from right now, still, they're out on the West Coast. But anyway, they went up to Big Sky because a friend of ours had gone there and bought a place. And our banker here had gone and bought a place when it went bankrupt. So anyway, that's the story of why we got to Aspen, or Big Sky.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, one other thing, it says that one of the things you wanted to do was to have a helicopter ride, and I understand that that's what you got for your 100th birthday. Are you looking forward to that? Do you think that's going to be fun? Where are they going to do that? Right here?
Well, yeah, it's out from the airport that you go by. Yeah, there's a school out there.
Well, tell us
I'm excited about it, but I have no idea who to ask at this point.
That's right. You get four other people on board.
I'd like to ask my friend. His name is Townsend, and I got his DNA because he was raised just 35 miles an hour from me. And we thought there'd be a connection, you know, but we couldn't find one because his family just came in the 1800s and mine in the 1600s, so there was no connection. So,
Okay.
But now he's on a cane, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll find
And I
some.
don't know about any of my girls, my women friends,
Right?
but I'll look. I have some younger ones that I know would go.
But you did get to ride the blimp. Tell us about the other two that you got to do.
The what?
Well, you rode a blimp.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because none of us have been on a blimp.
Well, the first one I rode was out in Big Sky. And my neighbor had a birthday party for her husband, and that's what she did. And so they had 3 little boys, and so I went up with the 3 little boys. And when we came down, we slid, and you know, they have fences all over the place. And we slid down a gully into the fence. And I had my arms around all 3 of them, and I was on top of them because I didn't want them hurt.
That was exciting.
Yeah, my first one.
Where did you ride the hot air balloon?
That was
that was the
hot
hot
air
air
balloon.
Oh,
And then what about the blimp?
The Goodyear blimp, that was
Oh,
here.
yeah, the Goodyear Blimp.
Sorry.
Well, there was a vice president of, I think it was Standard Oil, I keep getting these mixed up, who got tickets and invited Hal and I to go with he and his wife. And then the next one, they opened it up to the public, and a friend got tickets, so they only held 4. So I went that time, and then the next time, see, how did they do that? Oh, a Kappa Gamma friend, his husband worked over there where the Blimp is. He's a retired Army man, and she invited me there, so there were 4 Kappas that went on that one.
Fun. So on a blimp, is it like a hot air balloon with a basket?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, I
But
didn't
is
know.
it enclosed?
It's-
Yeah, and the first time I went, the captain was the son of a couple that lived in my building.
Oh, neat.
And later I saw them go by our house one stormy night. And when I saw him the next time, I said, "Weren't you worried?" He was heading south, and this was at nighttime. And he said, "Oh, no."
So what do you see? Where did they take you on the Blimp? What, you look out the
Oh,
little...
yeah, and they took us over the inlet, and there were sharks there, you know, and over my tennis club, and, you know, just around here. It wasn't a long trip, but there were men, as we descended, there were men with ropes that were ready to...
Hang on to it. Do you know approximately how high up you were? Did you know about your
Well, I
altitude?
could tell, see the people on the tennis court, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
So we just did around the area, over the Everglades and back. Yeah.
yeah, because
What are your favorite things to do here? What are your hobbies or interests or particular
Well,
things you like?
it's my volunteering, you know, and I play bridge, and I play military whist, and we have loads of entertainment and classes, and I have a swimming class, you know, and there's more to do than you can't believe. There are loads of clubs.